Lisa Maria Kaisa was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large, but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Kaisa, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lisa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lisa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lisa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lisa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lisa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lisa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lisa called several times inquiring about him. Lisa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime where he mentioned that illegal substance traffickers were holding him captive and demanding a ransom of $8,000. She strongly warned Jaime's family not to contact the police. This claim became a crucial point in a complex investigation, as detectives sought to solve the tragedy and uncover if there were any other hidden victims. During her interrogation, Lisa revealed that in 2020, while working at a cookie factory, she met Jaime Ian Chiguano. According to her, they became friends. Lisa wanted to return to her husband, who allegedly planned to blackmail Jaime for money. David made it clear to Lisa that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David gave Lisa a white powder and told her to put it in Jaime's food. Once she did, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up. Realizing what had happened, Lisa, in desperation, tried to win back her husband, but failed. In her despair, she ingested the same poison and gave it to her children. However, the poison did not have the expected effect on her, and she sought help from her neighbors to save herself from the horror that had befallen her children. Following her testimony, investigators launched a thorough investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement was found. No one close to the couple could have foreseen that Lisa Maria and David Acosta's lives would take such a tragic turn. When they met, Lisa was only 16 years old and still in high school, a dreamy and romantic girl, while David was a strong and determined young man. Their friendship quickly developed into strong feelings, leading to Lisa's unexpected pregnancy. Although their families disapproved of their relationship, David's parents supported their son and welcomed Lisa into their home. In difficult times, David's family provided genuine support to the young couple, even inviting Lisa to live with them to ensure she completed high school. When Lisa turned 18, the couple got married. 2 years later, they were expecting their second child, a daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own home, giving them an apartment where they found a corner of family happiness. However, over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Both spouses were unfaithful, leading to mistrust and disappointment. Their once boundless love began to weaken. Lisa also complained of psychological abuse from David, prompting her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, forcing David to leave the family home. At this point, Lisa began to blackmail David, demanding money for the chance to see their children. In early September 2020, Lisa's life took an unexpected turn when her eldest son began suffering from seizures. In desperation, she took him to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing his condition, doctors conducted tests and diagnosed a focal form of epilepsy, a severe condition affecting a specific part of the brain. Doctors advised Lisa to undergo further tests, including MRIs, and to consult specialists urgently. However, Lisa ignored these recommendations. A month later, her son suffered another seizure, and they returned to the emergency room. Reviewing his medical history, doctors discovered Lisa had not followed their earlier advice, failed to complete tests, and had not seen specialists, leaving her son without necessary treatment. They warned her that continued neglect could lead to legal consequences. Despite the warnings, Lisa disregarded the medical advice. A few weeks later, after her son's condition resurfaced, she called David, who was alarmed by her serious tone. She informed him that a social worker would visit to discuss. To brighten the waiting time, Lisa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up. So David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lisa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lisa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lisa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache. Her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lisa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lisa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lisa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lisa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed. But now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lisa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lisa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lisa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lisa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke. Lisa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lisa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious, and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lisa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lisa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him, and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lisa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lisa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lisa Maria Kaisa for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her, because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jamie Ianchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen. The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others, and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaisa was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Ianchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jaime's relatives claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lisa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lisa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lisa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lisa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lisa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lisa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there is evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lisa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lisa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lisa Maria Kaisa is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lisa could be released when she turns 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lisa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talen, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talen would be a real grown man, and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shaninia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shaninia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shaninia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shaninia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shaninia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shaninia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shaninia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shaninia was only 14 years old when she met Detrail Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shaninia and Detrail spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Detrail was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shaninia and Detrail did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son, who was named Dallin. Shaninia became a caring mother, not only to him, but also to Detrail's two children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Detrail's mother, always saw Shaninia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shaninia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Detrail, Shaninia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shaninia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shaninia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shaninia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon, and in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shaninia had 4 children together, as well as 1 child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, she was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need, on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016. An ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shaninia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shaninia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There, she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing: he must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shaninia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their minds. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shaninia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shaninia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shaninia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shaninia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shaninia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. Society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shaninia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Gimont, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shaninia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect: postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shaninia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shaninia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shaninia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shaninia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shaninia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shaninia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shaninia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Detrail's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson, Dallin. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shaninia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shaninia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Detrail, Dallin's father, also refused to believe in Shaninia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shaninia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shaninia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shaninia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort that gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shaninia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shaninia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shaninia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth. But she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shaninia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shaninia provided no details about who it might be or why, and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shaninia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shaninia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shaninia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County Criminal Court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shaninia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her. In February 2022, Shaninia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shaninia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shaninia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shaninia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. DeTrail did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the Children's Hospital where Shaninia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shaninia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever.
In San Jose, California, where the bustle of Silicon Valley fades into peaceful suburban streets, lived 99-year-old Jeanette Tamayo. A bright, cheerful child, Jeanette's life was filled with the simple joys of childhood school days, friends, and a loving family. June 6, 2003 started like any other day for Jeanette, a 4th grader at Blossom Valley School. But as she walked home from school, her world was about to change, in a way no one could have predicted. What awaited her at home was not the familiar comfort of family, but the presence of a stranger, a man whose actions would turn an ordinary afternoon into a harrowing ordeal of survival. This is not just a story of a crime. It's a testament to the strength of a young girl in the grip of terror. It's a story that challenges us to think about what we would do in the face of hair-raising fear. The sun shone brightly over the streets of San Jose, casting a warm glow on the laughter and chatter of children. Leaving school among them was 9-year-old Jeanette Tamayo, her backpack slung over her shoulder, making her way home, unaware of the shadow about to fall over her as Jeanette reached her home. An unexpected and chilling scene unfolded. Waiting inside was David Montiel Cruz, a man she had never met, whose presence would turn a safe haven into a scene of horror. Jeanette noticed that the front door was slightly open, but she decided her mother had returned home. She saw that in her bedroom, the window was broken and the phone cable was cut off. It was then that she realized that something was wrong, but it was already too late. She heard a stranger knocking on the door. She opened it and immediately felt a bad vibe coming from him. He asked questions, trying to find out if there was someone else in the house. When Jeanette tried to close the door, the man slid it open. He sexually assaulted her in her brother's room. In the next half hour, Jeanette's world was upended. Cruz stayed with Jeanette, casting a silent but palpable threat. His next moves were calculated and cold. The arrival of Jeanette's mother and 15-year-old brother only escalated the terror in an act of violence. Cruz attacked them and brutally beat both of them. He hit the mother repeatedly in the face and upper body. Jeanette's 15-year-old brother Pablo fought to protect his little sister, but was also savagely beaten. Pablo took a pan from the kitchen to attack the stranger, but the man grabbed it and hit Rosalia, Jeanette's mother, on the head. The nightmare escalated as Cruz, in a desperate bid to escape, dragged Jeanette to the garage, tied up, and terrified she was forced into the back seat of a car, trapped in a box, as her family fought valiantly. But in vain, Jeanette saw blood on their faces and asked the man if he had killed them. He didn't reply, only laughed. The little girl thought that her mother and brother were gone. She felt relieved when she saw her mother running after the car and her brother calling for help. As the car pulled away with Jeanette inside the quiet street, bore witness to a family shattered and a little girl's life thrown into chaos. What followed was a test of courage and wit. Beyond her years in the midst of abduction, a question loomed large. What was going to happen to the girl? According to experts, if a kidnapper has murderous intentions, the crime will be committed in the initial hours after the kidnapping. The accounts of long-term abduction survivors are almost unheard of, taking into consideration the abductor violent behavior. There was very little hope. San Jose police descended on the quiet Southwind Drive neighborhood, minutes after receiving a frantic 911 call from a neighbor at 4:37 p.m. They were combing the city on horseback, and with bloodhounds all day, and the FBI became fully involved in the investigation. The information was scarce. The girl's mother was stunned and bruised after the attack and couldn't tell them much. She and her son were treated at a local hospital. The girl's mother, Rosalia, had to be tied to the stretcher and forced to go to hospital against her will. Jeanette's cousin said to reporters, "Rosalia hasn't been eating. She's missing her little girl." Luckily, a neighbor gave a piece of vital evidence, her security camera video that showed the suspect's silver or tan four-door sedan, speeding away, however. Due to the vague car description and lack of a license plate number, the California Highway Patrol stated that it was unable to issue a statewide alert. Nevertheless, all the officers were on the lookout for the suspect's vehicle and focused mainly on the missing girl. When Jeanette was last seen, she was wearing a green shirt and black pants, long black hair with blonde highlights. In the front, her height 4'11". In the only description of the kidnapper the police had was this Latino man in his early 20s, wearing a light-colored t-shirt and a beanie cap, clean-shaven with a light mustache. He had a big SC rash on his face as Jeanette's mother had fought back, clawed him, and bit his fingers. He was possibly driving a Mazda sedan. The family moved into the house a few months ago. Word of the brazen abduction spread fast through the quiet neighborhood. The community was left shaken by the incident children, and their parents were scared. The police said that the kidnapper was clearly targeting that house and that family. The surveillance tape showed that when Jeanette walked up to her house, the abductor car was parked outside the Tomo home. Shortly after arriving, he got out of his car and entered the house. He waited nearly 30 minutes for the girl to get home before spending additional 30 minutes inside the house. Jeanette's elder brother said the first number on the blue and white California license plate of the kidnapper's car was a 5. He described the vehicle as a 4-door mid-size sedan with chromed wheels and tinted back windows. The suspect was caught on the neighbor's security camera several times during the abduction. However, the images were too fuzzy. The investigators were looking at all the people who had recently been to the house and at the previous tenants of the house who might have been the kidnapper's real target if the abductor lay in wait for his victim. How could he know that was her home? How did he know when she was supposed to return home? How did he know that at that moment, nobody else would be present? The police supposed he had received information from somebody who knew the family. San Jose police assigned over 150 officers to the case. They had a helicopter in the air. The city was flooded with pictures of Jeanette. The investigators were doing everything possible, but they were still unable to discover the girl's location in the grim reality of captivity. Young Jeanette Tamayo found herself in a situation that would test the limits of her spirit and mind. Held in a bedroom on the second floor of a white 2-story house, handcuffed and far from home, she faced challenges that no child should ever encounter in the next room. There was a TV on the next morning of abduction. Cruz was watching the news. Jeanette could hear her cousin addressing her on TV. She said that they were looking for her and told her to be strong and not to give up. That gave Jeanette hope. She decided to fight to get out of there or die trying. Jeanette's fear turned into courage. She said to herself that she's a fighter and she's going to make it for 2 days. Jeanette endured unimaginable fear and suffering at the hands of David Montiel Cruz. She was subject to sexual assault, and the man also threatened to kill her. He even attempted to smother her with a pillow. The young girl was terrified, but even in the darkest moments, her determination to survive never wavered. Her mind, resilient and sharp, began to craft a plan. Jeanette knew that direct confrontation or physical force would not lead to her freedom. Instead, she chose a path of psychological strategy to gain the trust of her captor. She started asking him casual questions and smiled back. When Cruz smiled at her, Santa Clara County Deputy District Attorney Matt Breaker, who prosecuted the case, said that killers often dehumanize their victims in interviews. Predators themselves often say they regard their victims merely as objects, no matter how scared she was, rather than screaming and crying. Jeanette engaged Cruz in conversation, sharing stories of her family, her dreams, and her life, reminding him subtly that she was not just a victim, an object, but a human being with a life full of potential. This approach is considered to be highly tactical, and it is thought to have saved lives in many abduction and hostage cases. As the hours passed, Jeanette's strategy began to show results. Cruz's demeanor shifted as the girl gained his trust. He uncuffed her and allowed her more freedom within her confines. Jeanette's kindness and humanity were slowly breaking through the barriers of his conscience. She kept interacting to the point where she became a real person. To him, Matt Breaker said, according to the FBI, talking is the most effective way to diffuse a violent situation. He is less likely to attack. The more he talks, connecting with him as a person might spoil a predator's fantasy. And if you treat a criminal with respect, he craves and sort of befriend him, instead of arguing. It might be more difficult for him to depersonalize and attack you. Ted Bundy and other serial killers also confessed that it was more difficult to kill if a person started talking to the point that they gave up their intention and chose a different victim. However, each case is individual. See whether or not it's working. If it's not working, the victim needs to rethink their strategy. There are things you should never do with a criminal. Threatening the criminal with jail may force him to kill his witness. Begging or showing fear arouses and entices him to abuse his power. A natural question. What? If I was your mother, sister, or child can trigger his deep-rooted hatred of them and women in general. It was during a moment of relative calm while watching TV that Jeanette seized an opportunity. She could convince Cruz that she suffered from a life-threatening condition requiring medication for asthma and a fictitious disease, creating a scenario where her survival depended on his action. In a twist of fate, this ruse became Jeanette's path to freedom. As dawn breaks on the third day of Jeanette Tamayo's harrowing captivity, a glimmer of hope arises through a blend of empathy and cleverness. She had begun to turn her desperate situation into a possibility for escape. Whether out of belief or a change of heart, Cruz made the decision that would lead to her freedom. Perhaps grappling with the gravity of his actions, he dropped Jeanette off on a street corner. A decision that marked the end of her physical captivity, but the beginning of a journey to bring her abductor to justice, had she been merely a shrieking object. It's easy to imagine that her abductor might have killed her or kept her hostage for years. Before letting Jeanette go, Cruz threatened to come back and kill her and her family if she told anyone who he was and what he did, with remarkable presence of mind. Jeanette ran into a nearby convenience store in East Palo Alto, about 30 miles from her home. Her immediate instinct was to seek help to reach the safety. She had been so brutally torn from the owner of the store, said that Jeanette was crying when she entered the market around 10:30 p.m. Later, Jeanette said that she was crying because she was so happy to be free again. The owner asked her if she was okay, and the girl said no. He then recognized the missing girl from TV. The police were called, marking the first step in her path to reclaiming her life. When Jeanette's neighbors heard the news, they gathered on the street and hugged the child's mother, said her daughter was born for the second time on that day. For her, in her interview with the police, Jeanette demonstrated an astonishing level of detail and awareness. She recounted the directions Cruz had taken after the kidnapping, a crucial piece of information. In tracing his whereabouts, she was able to recall every turn Cruz took in his car, leading police straight to his house. She also had evidence in her pockets, some things from her kidnapper's house, including his watch. She picked those things because the detectives on her favorite shows, CSI and Law & Order, always looked for clues. But Jeanette's astuteness didn't stop there. In an extraordinary display of acumen, she had memorized Cruz's cell phone number when he ordered pizza during her captivity. This piece of information was the final key needed to locate Cruz, armed with Jeanette's detailed account. The police swiftly moved to arrest Cruz. It was Jeanette in the back of police car who showed them his house, and she had also drawn a layout of the house for the police. Cruz was apprehended as he prepared to flee his plans, thwarted by the bravery and intelligence of a young girl whose spirit he could not break. He was hiding in the attic, but thanks to the layout, the police were able to find him. He did fight with the officers during the arrest after being bitten by a police dog. He repeatedly kicked and attacked the officers. Jeanette's mother said after the abduction, "What it feels like to lose a child. I think you feel like you're going to die." Deputy Chief Rob Davis, the lead investigator on the case, said, "She is an extremely bright and articulate young woman, and she's also brave." In January 2005, Cruz, then 26, faced the consequences of his actions. He was convicted and sentenced to over a century in prison, a sentence that spoke not only to the severity of his crimes, but also to the strength of the case, built on Jeanette's testimony. Thanks to Jeanette and her bravery, he never hurt any other child again. What drove Cruz to commit this act of violence, understanding the mind behind the crime, is a journey into a complex labyrinth of motives and past experiences, seeking answers in the shadows of the human psyche. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a range of factors that could lead to such criminal behavior, from troubled childhoods to a desperate need for control. The motives are as varied as they are complex. In similar cases, perpetrators often exhibit a pattern of escalating behavior, a journey from small transgressions to major crimes. It's a descent into a world where the value of human life and dignity becomes lost in a twisted narrative of power and control. Understanding the why is more than an academic pursuit. It's a key to preventing future tragedies, a way to recognize warning signs before they erupt into violence. The story didn't end for Jeanette. Then ahead of her lay 6 years of therapy and a constant struggle with paralyzing fear of the outside world, particularly men. This fear was so overwhelming that it often prevented her from leaving her house. When she turned 15, Jeanette finally resolved to face her fear. She was determined not to let trauma take over her life. She decided to meet Heather Randall, the detective who had worked on her case, and with Jeanette's help, had put Cruz behind bars today. Jeanette has resolved to harness her innate courage and keen intellect to become a detective. Her goal is to use everything in her power to help and protect her community. She is currently studying law enforcement at the San Diego Police Academy. Jeanette's ordeal shows us that in the face of danger, quick thinking and a strong presence of mind can make a significant difference. Her ability to strategize, to empathize, and to ultimately turn the table. Abels on her captor serves as a powerful reminder of the strength that lies within each of us, often untapped until tested by adversity. In the darkest corners of true crime, there are often glimmers of hope and resilience that can teach us invaluable lessons about the human spirit. Jeanette says that every person has a story, that no matter what life throws at us, we're all fighters, and every one of us has the ability to keep going. Thank you for watching the entire video. Hello, and see you again in the new video.